Hello, everybody, in this wonderful Christmas season. Our prayers go out to all those people that have suffered through the tornadoes that swept through the middle of the United States here and led to many casualties and injuries and destruction. So there's always these things that come to meet us. And, we always have to be sensitive to the plight of others. And in fact, that's the message that we could give on this Christmas is how we're all connected. And the more that we can rise to the occasion of being individuals, the greater the contribution that we can contribute. And this is the power of faith that I was making reference to last week, and that it's an actual power, and it's something that can fortify your spirit and give you the strength to meet the challenging times. And so I can't see Santa, and so Santa's with us. He's over my shoulder there, and I have to resituate myself a little bit. Everything's the opposite of what it is in this mirror image. And so we're here with Reverend David William Parry from the city of London and sometimes merry old England. And my name is John Barnwell, and I'm here in Detroit, the Straits, Detroit, in the US of A, in the state of Michigan, the hand of Manitou. And those of you that don't know, that's Michigan. It's like a hand. And according to the Indian legends, that Manitou, the Great Spirit, impressed his hand on the earth in blessing. And so this is considered to be a sacred area amongst the indigenous people, and blessings to those people and to all people, really everywhere. And before I go into one of my little mini speeches, so to speak, I'd like to say hi to Reverend David and see how he's doing in merry old England. Hi there, David.
Hi there, John. I love your Christmas tree, and I love Santa behind you in what looks like more of the original clothing than the Coca-Cola garb.
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely? We've just started putting the decorations up this weekend. There are Christmas lights in the front garden. Nobody's done the tree yet, but I think this is the weekend to do it. This road, every single house has lights on, so it's rather jolly. And it's sort of, this is a troubled nation at the moment. So it's good to remember that, there's always light. It can't always be the night. And, the battle was won 2,000 years ago. So there's no need to be of great concern, because if you're part of the body of Christ, you're destined for glory.
Amen. And that kind of ties into some of the themes that I was hoping to be able to address today. I just have to figure out what comes first here. Well, let's go first to something. It's not a Christian, or it's not a Christmas theme in the obvious sense, because it has to do with events that came after the crucifixion and points before that and around that, So in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 17, and I'm going to be sharing from the King James Version, that's my favorite. But in chapter 17, verse 1 through 13, it says, "And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, and be not afraid. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you, that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. And so that's a very telling episode in that it's making a clear statement regarding reincarnation, that Jesus himself is saying that Elias is John the Baptist, and that they have done with him what they listed, or done with him what they will. And of course, we know that he was executed and beheaded and served on a platter, his head. So the very gruesome for a Christmas story, but yet in understanding the import of that, for the centuries since the 4th century, reincarnation and likewise karma have not played any kind of obvious role within the tenets of most forms of Christianity. But that's a central theme that has now come to fruition, and according to Rudolf Steiner, we have entered into the period to where we will begin to develop towards the capacity to be able to unfold an understanding and experience regarding those previous incarnations of ours at first, and depending on our degree of development, we go through stages to where we can eventually reach the point at which all of the phases of evolution of which the Earth is the 4th stage. That is the tremendous cosmic drama we're all involved in. And so I'm going to make reference to a lecture from Collected Works, Volume 117, that he gave in Munich on December 4th in 1909. The title of the lecture is The Ego, Part 1. And let me pull up the text itself. Oh, where did I put it? Yeah, well, these things happen. Here we go. Rudolf Steiner in this lecture says, and I quote, "It is now the task of the anthroposophical way of thinking, and the method of thought is more important than the theories, that we learn to speak a language is really not merely understood by the human soul, so long as it's in a physical body, but understood also when the soul is no longer bound to the instrument of the physical brain. For instance, either by a soul still in the body but able to perceive spiritually, or by a soul gone through the gate of death. That is the essential. If we bring forward those ideas which explain the world, which explain the human being, then that is the speech which cannot merely be understood here in the physical world, but also by those who are no longer incarnated in physical bodies and live between death and a new birth. Yes, what is spoken of in an anthroposophical way is heard and understood by the so-called deaf. They are fully one with us on a basis where the same speech is spoken. There we speak to all human beings because in a certain connection it is chance whether a human soul is in a body of flesh or in the condition between death and a new birth. And we learn through anthroposophy a speech comprehensible to all human beings, whether they're in one or the other condition. Thus, we speak a speech within a field of anthroposophy, which is spoken also for the so-called dead. We really contact the innermost kernel of man, the innermost being of man, through what we cultivate in a real sense in anthroposophical considerations. Even if they appear apparently abstract, we penetrate into the soul of man. And because we penetrate to the soul of man, we liberate man from all group soulness. Man becomes in this way more and more capable of really grasping himself and his ego, his I. That is the characteristic, that those who come to anthroposophy today, who really take up anthroposophy, appear in comparison with others who remain far from it. As if through anthroposophical thoughts, their ego would crystallize as a spiritual being, which is then carried through the gate of death with the others in that place where the I being is, which remains there, which is now there in the body, and which remains after death. There is a hollow space, a nothingness. Everything else which one can take up as ideas today will become more and more worthless for the real kernel of man's soul being. The central point of man's being is grasped through what we take up as anthroposophical thoughts that crystallizes the spiritual substance in man. He takes that with him after death, and with that he perceives in the spiritual world. He sees and hears with it in the spiritual world, and with it he penetrates to that darkness which otherwise exists for man in the spiritual world, and is thereby brought about that when through these anthroposophical thoughts and way of thinking, man develops this I in him today, which now stands in connection with all the world wisdom we can acquire. If he develops it, he carries it over also into his next incarnation. Then he is born with this now developed I and remembers himself in this developed I. That is the deeper task of anthroposophical movement today, to send over to their next incarnation a number of human beings with the ego, in which they remember themselves as an individual ego. They will be the human beings who form the kernel of the next period of civilization. These people who have been well prepared through the anthroposophical spiritual movement to remember their individual I will be spread over the whole earth. For the essential in the next period of culture will be that these people who will not be limited by single localities, but spread over the entire earth. These individual people will be scattered over the whole earth, and within the whole earth sphere will be the kernel of humanity, who will be essential for the sixth period of civilization. And so it will be the case amongst these people that they will know themselves as those who in their previous incarnation strove together for their individual I. And so that's very much in keeping with the verses that I shared with you from the Gospel of Matthew, and in that there's a meeting between the beings in this world having contact with Moses and Elias on the other side of the threshold. And so there's this whole idea that there's this community of beings that transcends the limits of the physical world in which we live. And so that's kind of a seed I wanted to plant for today in this wonderful Christmas season.
It is a wonderful Christmas season. Not quite sure how to respond to that. Yeah, but I mean, the table light is, I mean, what would the Orthodox Church call it? The unmanifest radiance is, of course, one of the major factors that didn't come across from Orthodoxy to Catholicism. It's one of the major, in terms of disputes, it's way down the list, but in terms of actual impact, spiritual impact, I suspect it's monumentally important. The fact that anybody at any point can actually find and experience the inner light within themselves, which is the light that Christ manifested and the light of those gigantic beings around him, it is there always. I mean, certainly a more legalistic and Aristotelian Catholic Church, I'm not speaking out of line, I mean, I'm not sure many Catholics would disagree with that, was a lot more concerned with doctrine than a Platonic Orthodox Church, which is more concerned with gradations of mystery. But I don't know. So too many things went missing, and that for me is a gigantic omission. But I think one of the main failings of Catholicism is to sort of kick that into touch and assume it's not that important when it's actually one of the most significant occurrences in the New Testament. Some people have even compared the table light to the flames of hell, of course. Those who are ready can embrace it, and those that can't are befuddled or repelled by it. That I'm not sure I go along with that particular, although I can understand that one, that particular interpretation, but it is a very potent interpretation. I mean, certainly if you look at Quakers and the inner light, I mean, these things reoccur on a folk level, even if they're discouraged by large organizations. I just wish the church would spend more time looking at the mysteries. Obviously, I've got a sacramentalist attitude, even though I confessed to you a minute ago, I've just spent an hour and a bloody half preaching. So I'm withered at the moment. I'm a withered David. And, I'm a Protestant at heart, I admit it. But there we are. What can you do? Yeah, it's stuff like this that worries me, because it strikes me that Catholicism, and I suppose if I'm labels, I suppose if I'm looking at, where does Uncle David fit in all of this? It must be something like independent Catholic, the independent Catholic movement, or it must be something like the liberal Catholic movement. Therefore, I'm slightly more au fait with theosophical terms for what that type of Catholicism would be. And it's overwhelming. I mean, it's intoxicating. And I find that sort of gradations of mystery on nearly an equal par with the Orthodox guys. But yeah, it worries me that too much of the mystical and experiential has gone missing. I mean, that's why the writings of someone like a Steiner, that's why, I don't know, there's just something in the Western mindset, the Anglophone mindset, where this must mean that, even though we all know at the back of our minds it probably doesn't. We've got to somehow get beyond this facade. Whitened sepulchres. My God, if ever there was an age and a period when that was true, it's now. Where it's more important to look great at a rave, and are they still called raves? I can't remember. It seems to change every few weeks. More than have you a sort of a loving and accepting heart, which is really, of course, what Christmas is all about. I mean, I'll tell you three of the things I was talking about a minute ago. I used to get invited to take Bible study with Pentecostals. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, you traditionalist. So I'm not entirely sure why to this day, but they like my Bible studies. And of course, in Pentecostalism, you need three proofs. I'll drag this to the three wise men for a minute, because, of course, in Victorian translations of the Bible, they went missing. Either the wording was changed out of all recognition, or they actually cut the text. You know, shades of heresy. What's a heretic? If you remove material as opposed to add material, that's heresy. So it just went missing. I mean, the attitude seems to have been, oh, let's not worry. Oh, you know, they haven't been to Oxbridge. Let's not worry their little heads about having Persian pagans turn up at the crib. You know, astrologers, let's not worry them with that sort of stuff. Let's just get rid of it from scripture. You know, and that worries me today, because that's still going on, of course. You know, if a particular church, and they're all guilty of it, a particular church or denomination don't like something, and they either play it down to the extent it's no longer visible, or it's de facto removed. I was talking about the three wise men. You need the three proofs positive. Anyone that's interested needs to look at Isaiah 61-6, Psalm 72:11, and of course Matthew 2:1-12, where the kings and their gifts are very clearly talked about. And they were looking for the light. They were looking not only for the light of the Christ child, they were actually following a light to find that. I mean, you know, light and the religion of light are embedded, the mysteries of light are embedded in our tradition. I mean, certainly the missing factor that goes from the Mount Tabor experience is our good Lord actually very clearly says there are people who will not taste death before they've seen the kingdom. And you get sort of people with half, well, not even half nowadays, you know, a smidgen of biblical education saying, well, there we are, that's that one down. But actually it happened. The Tabor light, when Christ becomes radiant, is the transfiguration. You see the other world as it is and how you will be in that world. Therefore, they had seen the kingdom before, you know, and the physical end is neither here or there. They had seen the kingdom and the transfiguration, the transformation, the divinization, the deification, all of that. People tend to forget that baptism is meant to start a process of deification. And I think Steiner would have used a different vocabulary for that. Maybe not. I don't know him as well as you. But certainly that's gone missing, because lots of evangelicals don't like the fact we actually might be creatures worthy of God's creation. Let's be on our knees forever at Sunday worship, you know, which isn't the idea. We're made companions of angels and archangels. That's not the idea. And the Tabor light is the great giveaway. What that means in practice, of course, you would need a mystic to unfold. So more power to Steiner. And that's all I can really say at that point.
Yes, well, that keys in again to the point that I was trying to develop here, and just recently I posted a picture of Rudolf Steiner's Goetheanum, the first Goetheanum that was out of carved wood with elaborate carvings and stained glass and all of that. But before I get to that, I want to share something from an esoteric lesson of February 12th, 1911, where Rudolf Steiner makes an indication regarding the time in the future when it will be possible to bring anthroposophy, although at this early period he was referring it to theosophy, that it would be possible to bring anthroposophy to all mankind. This period, within the context of the vast evolutionary periods of human history, is not too long. And he says, and I quote, "Since November 1879, a handful of people have become mature enough to undertake theosophical teachings, but it is only just a small group, while other modern people are still incapable of taking up these teachings. They involve themselves in dreams, fantasies, or even become angry over such things. We have been given about 400 years to make these teachings accessible to all people in the garment of theosophy." By that he means anthroposophy or spiritual science. And I continue, with the quote, "All those who fought against it in their current incarnation will have the opportunity to be born again in the next 400 years. After that time, there must also be a corresponding group present to represent theosophy in the right way." And so it's up to us, that we can integrate ourselves.
I think there's something wrong with this transmission. I'm hoping it's not me, and I'm hoping I'm actually speaking to somebody out there. Hello, hello. Is there anybody out there? It might be John, because his picture has frozen the other side of this screen, and now it's disappeared. Oh God, the bit I hate when there's not anything the other side of the screen. What should I talk about? So, yeah, I mean, I started, I suppose, with theosophy as opposed to anthroposophy. Now I can hand you back.
Oh, I guess it says, John is frozen. Well, it is kind of cold. Yeah. Anyways, where was I? Yeah, my whole browser crashed. It was too much for my browser to bear. But anyways, where was I? Yes, so we get into that, the reference that Rudolf Steiner is making there, and I think I have that thing disappear on me too. If you give me a moment here. There. So he continues, and he's making reference to the Goetheanum, and this is in a lecture series, Collected Works, Volume 286, which in English was published as Ways to a New Style of Architecture. However, the lecture of March 7, 1914 is not in the English edition, so this is perhaps relevant that we bring it forward right now. Rudolf Steiner said, and I quote, "Confusion and devastation will prevail as the year 2000 approaches. Then no piece of wood from our Dornach building will stand, one upon the other. Everything will be laid to ruin and destroyed. We shall look down upon it from the spiritual world. But when the year 2086 arrives, buildings will be seen arising all over Europe, buildings dedicated to spiritual goals. Buildings which will be images of ours in Dornach with its two domes. This will be the golden age for such buildings." And the building he's referring to, I'll bring up a little picture for those of you that don't know what I'm referring to, but it's at the top of my Facebook, and it's also available all over as the first Goetheanum. But let me bring this picture up here. And then we can continue. Let's see here. Full size. Okay, that ought to work. And there you have the first Goetheanum. And I'm assuming that you can see this because I got something in front of it here. There we go. Truly remarkable structure. And this building was destroyed by an arsonist on New Year's Eve, December 31st of 1922, January 1st, 1923. It was replaced by a poured concrete Goetheanum that was also designed and constructed by Rudolf Steiner and his associates, and it's still there. And but this first one was made out of wood that were assembled completely without nails or screws. They used wooden pegs and tongue and groove methods. and had a double dome that was the largest, included the largest dome in the world, larger than the dome at St. Peter's. And it was the larger dome is balanced on 7 pillars, represent the sevenfold theme of the Grail language that's outlined in the outline of esoteric science. And there's numerous stained glass windows depicting super sensible aspects of the understanding of which we're referring. And the ceiling was decorated with motifs that depicted the whole of human evolution, and sculptures carved huge column bases, capitals, and architraves with images of metamorphosis. And some of this presentation here was from an email I got years ago by my late friend Paul O'Leary, who is of blessed memory, and but he put together a collection of Rudolf Steiner's work that was published on the 7 layers of the earth, some of you might be familiar with. But in any regard, so we have this challenge that Rudolf Steiner is pointing towards, and it's really quite a daunting challenge, in that you have to remember that in earlier episodes, I talked about how we're in the age of Michael as of November of 1879. And preceding that period, we were in the archangelic period of the Archangel Gabriel, who's actually here with me. He's right behind me there, blowing on his. I have a hard time moving, getting out of my own way. That's my life. I got to go the other way. I got to go left to go right. Where is he? Where is he? He's hiding it. There he is. See him down there? He's peeking down there. I'll move my arm. There's the Archangel Gabriel blowing his horn. In any regards, having a little fun here. So during the archangelic period of Gabriel, which had to do with the group context of family and community and nation, and also associations, including secret associations. So you have these various esoteric groups and lodges and all that kind of activity that the teachings of esoteric nature it was appropriate for them to be secret at that time, because people were not prepared to receive them unless they sought it out in a strong way. But since in that period, Rudolf Steiner talks about how a cognitive metamorphosis happened within the human brain that was in preparation for the age of Michael that would begin in 1879. And he said that every human being would have this variation in the convolutions of the frontal lobe that could actually be seen were you to exhume a body of someone from, say, the 12th century and compare it. You'd be able to actually see physical differences. So that there was this metamorphosis that happened in the frontal lobe of the brain that had to do with developing the consciousness soul, which is in its transformed nature referred to as the spiritual soul. So that by coming into relationship with the ideation of the spiritual world, you take up the tasks that was set aside for this metamorphosis and develop the spiritual cognition. Of course, the actual coming into a level at which the individual human ego is beginning to go through the catharsis, which is the transformation of the astral body. That has to do with the 2-petal lotus in the brow, as I've made reference to many times. And that can bring one to an awareness of life just before birth. And then if one goes to the next stage of the throat of the 16-petal lotus, which is in reference to the path of compassion as laid out by Buddha in the 5th, 6th century BC, where that first message was given, and that's akin to the message given in the Gospel of St. Luke and the Alleluia. And then if you go all the way into the highest stage of the Atman, then you have that force that's actually moving the blood. And that has a reference to these convolutions of the brain that have been transformed. But in any regards, everybody has them. But if you don't use them, they will atrophy. And the people in which they don't take up the spiritual challenges and this organ begins to atrophy, they will start to come into relationships of a group nature, and they will have a kind of a hive mind, a group mind. They will not manifest their individual ego, which is actually the Christ in you. And so that's quite a daunting challenge that's set before those that have taken up the task of spiritual science. But there it is nonetheless. It's in Rudolf Steiner's own words.
I remember reading about the sort of fossilization of inner subtle organs many, many years ago. I spent some time looking at the texts good theosophists aren't meant to look at, like oh God, what was it? Tantric yoga. And I must admit, discovering wonderful things. I mean, oh God, what was it? The perfume garden of Shiraz, and there was something else of that. What did the Kama Sutra, which of course is actually a shastra, not a sutra, and wondering where all this was leading. It can't be dismissed. It can't be dismissed. I think the present world's getting too dismissive of the non-mechanical and obvious, which is worrying me no end. It's part of the loss of subtlety in our sort of social discourse at the minute. I mean, at the end of the day, it is completely arguable. It's completely fair to contend that things like tantric research in the East, I mean, because the tantrikas, the mages, the magicians, of course, were heavily involved with herbalism at an unbelievably early date, as well as what we would call metallurgy. So, I mean, they were starting the proto-sciences and also talking about all these things: subtle bodies, chakras, inner subtle organs, and detailing them, mapping them, and drawing anatomies. I mean, this is not trivial material. And the fact that nowadays, if you go to, say, places like the School of Oriental and African Studies, they will say, isn't that interesting? But it's not real. I mean, isn't that interesting? But it's not real. And, you know, the sort of knee-jerk reaction. But, you know, hang on, these people pioneered the whole of the sciences. I don't think they can actually be dismissed that easily. So I remember meeting people halfway. I don't want to be one of those people that dismisses the academy just because it doesn't know everything. It doesn't mean it knows or believes nothing. And I think it's got very many challenges at the moment, including an unacknowledged credo, the credo of scientific reductive materialism, which it needs to snap out of. So we've got to be careful. And it's got a high priesthood and a credo. So you've got to be a bit careful of that. I mean, is the Greek search for truth and beauty to be abandoned so easily? I do hope not. In this part of the world, of course, dare I say it, it was the pagan fraternity and what some people termed as witchcraft that actually was doing the same thing as the tantrikas in the East. They were looking at herbs. I mean, if you look very early, a long time ago, most of the women that were accused of witchcraft were herbalists and healers. The church, in all of its wisdom, remember, we're looking at politics and church fused. I'm one of the people that likes the fact those things aren't fused, because when they come back together, it will be in a much more subtle and complex form. You know, phrases like interfering with God's purposes were thrown around at some little girl trying to do her best to heal everybody with lemons. You know, I mean, this is not good at all. Or, you know, everybody's cows have got blight and she knows the right grasses to get them better, but that's witchcraft. You know, no, 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 no. We need a more mature attitude generally in our society at the minute, and not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Certainly, if you're looking at some of the greats of theological history, like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus, they were also practicing magicians, of course. And you need to think, well, you know, can two of the highest intellects in history have been completely wrong compared to postgraduate doctoral students nowadays, who are desperately fighting for funding, which is why they never say anything interesting. You know, we've got to get a grip on all of this. We've got to get a grip. The fact that they were talking about something, I mean, light was sort of shed on that a bit, with since we're talking about heretics. I mean, the great heretic Henri Corbin in France, who came up, what was that phrase he used? The imaginal, I think that was it. You know, and he was looking, of course, at Sufis and their own personal descriptions, their own collective descriptions of subtle bodies and subtle organs. And him saying, well, you know, is it real in the sense that there is an actual anatomy that can be dissected? No, it's not. But is it so unreal that we can actually say there is no content there, which de facto is ridiculous? So, you know, if you're looking at forbidden knowledge, so you get the Tantrigas in the East, you get the alchemists in the West. I mean, what actually were they looking for? And I think the clue is given by scholars and mystics like Paracelsus, who, of course, some people would say is still alive because he's meant to have actually discovered the grand elixir itself, so he's still here. Whatever that means. I mean, certainly in the East, you'd have said chakras because that was the accepted and open vocabulary. That was very unwise during certain paranoid parts of church history. So what the alchemists, if we take them as examples as opposed to witchcraft, which is much more problematic and at various stages of church history, more to do with paranoia and superstition than actually anybody practicing anything. I mean, if you look at the witch trials, what you're looking at is misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis. There are one or two bizarre cases where negative energies do seem to turn up, but we have to, and you know, that needs careful study. But we've got to be honest. I mean, most of the cases don't read like that. They read like neurotic women being neurotic, and the church completely jumping to wrong conclusions. That's what most of them read like. So in the East, you've got people talking about chakras openly. In the West, you've got alchemists talking about lodestones. Lodestones are mysterious. You don't find them everywhere. Only the wise man will know where to look. So you're getting back to the same type of territory, because without the lodestones, nothing is possible. You know, no magic is possible, no alchemy is possible. I mean, you're talking at the moment about the type of material and the type of esoteric. Isn't esoteric a truly beautiful word? In other words, a superior type of cognition, a superior type of general understanding, a superior type of epistemology. Certainly, although our ancestors were not fools, it's been mooted by various powers that be that I should have an open discussion with Eric von Daniken. Apparently, Eric's quite interested because I read him at school. How old is he? I was at bloody school when I read Chariot of the God. Anyway, I mean, it's been mooted because with deep respect to him, and I think he's got a great idea, and there's nothing wrong with new ideas. You're actually looking at vocabulary choices and the reinterpretation of holy books. So, you know, are they designed as phenomenological history books? No, they're mystical texts talking about spiritual realities. That's what mystical books do. That's what holy books do. So there's all that going on, and it made, I suppose, yes, recently, a bit, I'm digressing now, it made me very aware of the difference between all these things. Certainly the academy wants to dismiss that type of discourse from its very hermetically, there's an irony there, hermetically closed body. They don't want to discuss anybody from European history that's actually pursued that type of knowledge. I mean, they're expelling people from their ranks who even want to touch upon such things. So when we're looking at about Steiner's work and what could genuinely be seen as a very healthy counterculture, wherein the esoteric as an idea is held high and prized, I think we've got to be very careful not to think, oh, that's mumbo jumbo. That's, that's, oh, what are they talking about? It's all wafty candle new age, which I've heard. As opposed to something of a much more subtle and elevated level. I mean, the title of our discussions centers around what is truth. Well, I mean, okay, one of the semantic interpretations of truth is based around descriptive potential, how accurate and how widespread, how all-encompassing are our descriptions of a particular event, a particular happening, and how far does that correspond with the phenomenon that we are trying to actually describe. I mean, that is actually one of the definitions of truth nowadays. If it is an accurate and comprehensive description of a phenomena, then that is truth language, that is truth talk. But if they're willing to admit that, and it's Husserl, of course, the great phenomenologist, that kicks too much reductivity into touch, then it amazes me that they still won't look at people like Steiner seriously. When, I mean, he started off as one of their number, he can't be dismissed at all. I mean, I think Blavatsky, who is another favourite of mine, of course, is a much more problematic character, but not for the reasons people normally think. Because you're looking at a completely different character in her case. In Steiner's case, he was an academician. He had that methodology, he had that attitude, and he was articulating a superior type of epistemology. But are they really saying nowadays that that's really what they don't want to do? In which case, what we've done is lost our sense of understanding and truth, and there will be no more alchemists and there'll be no more seismic discoveries. I don't know what you think of that, John. I went on too long.
Well, I enjoyed it. In any regard, well, going back to the verses from Matthew, where Jesus Christ is clearly making the point regarding reincarnation of John the Baptist. I remember I ran into a Jesuit priest at a conference we were having where the group that I was lecturing for had rented a facility that was owned by the Jesuits, of all people. But we ran into this Jesuit father outside in the parking lot, and we were talking with him, and I asked him about reincarnation, and he said, "There's nothing in Scripture against it." That's a very, very cleverly Jesuitical way of framing a response. There's nothing against it. And I've heard that come, other people telling me a similar story. And so what that tells me is that not only is that his opinion on that, but that I think that there's something official going on there, being that I've heard it through different sources where they tend to come up with the same response. So there is that. Although I know that they're at the Franciscan monastery at Assisi, they have a complete collected edition of Rudolf Steiner's works in German and are avidly studying it. And actually my friend Joe Visconti, who found out about anthroposophy from his parents because his mother had gone to a Catholic seminary, and in the library at the seminary found a bunch of Steiner books, and out of that became an anthroposophist and a eurythmist. And so he was able to have this experience of Rudolf Steiner's work from a very early age. It was always around. And so you have it quietly. And in fact, Joe himself has said that he was talking to priest in the Catholic Church, and he said, well, yes, Rudolf Steiner's work, well, that's for the adult Catholics. I thought that's kind of funny. But you bring up alchemy, the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine. It's attributed to a Benedictine monk and Hermetic philosopher Basil Valentine or Basilius Valentinus. But there's controversy surrounding that, and some people feel that they were actually written by a salt manufacturer from the 16th and into the 17th century, and that he was the one involved. But anyways, he had considerable knowledge, whoever wrote it, and showed that ammonia could be obtained by the action of alkali on sal ammoniac or ammonium chloride. And he also described the production of hydrochloric acid. And so he was quite knowledgeable. But Walter Johannes Stein, who was the mentor of one of my mentors, Walter Johannes Stein wrote 9th century world history in the light of the Holy Grail. And he had once asked Rudolf Steiner what he thought about the 12 keys of Basil Valentine. And then he went on to the triumphal chariot of antimony and what Rudolf Steiner thought of that particular alchemical work. And Rudolf Steiner gave the most interesting remark. He said, well, that's very much a symbolical text that is very much like my book, Knowledge of Higher Worlds, How Is It Attained? And so you see him describing the triumphal chariot of antimony as a initiation text, that it was given you in symbolical language, the supersensible tools to be able to gain access into the supersensible. So that this is something that's quietly worked its way, and you see it couched in mystery in works such as the works of Basil Valentine. And you made reference to the Greek church fathers. Of course, you could look at the church fathers as a whole. You have the Western church, the Latin church. They were essentially lawyers. And then the Eastern church, the Orthodox, they were essentially philosophers. So you could see kind of the Eastern as being the more Platonic side, and the Western is more the Aristotelian. And then you have the Church of Rome taking on the vestiture of the Roman Empire. And yet the mysteries of the inner nature of Christianity is still embraced to this day in the Eastern Church. So there's a certain great sympathy I have with that particular stream of Christianity. And of course, Rudolf Steiner does make reference to the point that the mysteries, the Grail mysteries, came from the East, bearing that inward Grail mood of soul. And they came into relationship with the Arthurian stream, which is that cosmic dimension. And you see that in the Last Supper with the mystery of the blood and the wine at the Last Supper. That's the inward mysteries of the Grail. And so I put a cup on the image for today's show that we're talking about the capacity to receive. That's the Grail. And so the blood is the inward mission of the individual ego, whereas the bread represents that cosmic dimension that's represented by the 12 knights of King Arthur, or the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 that surrounds the 13th within the mysteries of the North, so that you have that cosmic dimension in the North and West, whereas you have the more inward dimension in the East and South, like, for example, in Egypt. And so there's this coming together of these two dimensions at the Last Supper. And in that Last Supper, Christ is pointing towards the fact of that he has come to bring together all true, genuine mysteries into one meal. They're all sitting at the table. The disciples are there, and they, in a sense, are archetypes representing this 12-fold cosmic dimension coming together and finding their individual nature, and in going out into the world as pollen, really. And that's the dimension that the poet Novalis makes. He uses pollen as a poetic metaphor in his works. And I'm looking for the reference here, but the computer's a little slow. And I can scroll down for a second. Whoops. Computer's a little funky today, but it'll catch up. Yeah, here we go. I think we're there almost. There's so many. Here it is. Yeah, Blütenstaub. Blütenstaub means pollen. So it's Blütenstaub Fragmenta in 1798. It translates as Pollen and Fragments by Novalis, which is the pseudonym of George Philipp Friedrich Freiherr von Hardenberg, who died at a very early age. But he says, and I quote, "Imagination places the future world for us either above or below in reincarnation. We dream of travels throughout the universe. Is not the universe within us? We do not know the depths of our spirit. The mysterious path leads within. In us or nowhere lies eternity with its worlds, the past and the future." And so you have it there from one of the most profound souls I know of, who was born on May 2nd, 1772, and he passed on March 25th in 1801. And so he's considered to be the first of the Romantics, and in many regards, perhaps the greatest of the Romantics. And the whole Romantic movement came to embody the aspirations as poetically expressed, as artistically expressed. We've made the point time after time that art is higher than philosophy, and it's higher than science in a certain sense, because, like Reverend David was saying just last week, that yeah, their science is definitive, but if it's so definitive, how come they have to come out with a new version every year? But yet, if you look at art, is not the art of Beethoven as relevant now as when it was created? It doesn't have to be revised. The Sistine Chapel doesn't have to be revised. So that there's a certain open set to art that's lacking in the definitive works of science and philosophy, in that when you start to bring things into the realm of abstract reasoning, you're defining things within limits, and because of those limits, you have to leave certain things out of your figuring that you don't know. There's things you don't know. And unless you approach it artistically, you can't really, it's not easy to leave a space for newness to come into being. And so that's where art is so important. And Rudolf Steiner says that when looking at a great work of art, say of a Raphael, that one should look at it in a way in which one is gazing at the inspiration from which it arose, rather than just the art itself.
I can't help taking pot shots at the science, not because I don't respect science and its achievements. Its achievements speak for themselves. I mean, it's doing remarkable and wonderful things. I love taking pot shots at the pretensions of modern scientism, where there is no other form of discourse. And by the way, we're going to throttle every other type of discourse just to make sure there's no other type of discourse. I find that amusing, to say the least, because it's not scientific. By the way, asking questions is scientific. Yeah, I don't have this. It's just probably me being weird, or being European. I mean, I don't tend to put science or engineering on a pedestal. Oh dear, that happened again where John suddenly went off screen and David panics totally. But keep firm and just say what you're going to say. So, I don't sort of reify the sciences, the hard sciences, in the manner we're all expected to nowadays. Certainly for me, philosophy and the arts are higher than the sciences in so many ways. Not because philosophy has a continuous narrative or series of narratives leading in a sort of particular linear line. And the glory of Western philosophy in particular is that a philosopher can start at any particular point in reasoning or with facts or with experiences and take it from there, which is why most of the time it's unwise to compare philosophers because they're simply not talking about the same thing in the same way. And it would probably take a lifetime to work out what the comparative vocabulary of different philosophers is before you can work out if they agree or disagree or not. With the arts, you're looking at something genuinely like a flow, like a current, like an inherited tradition that flowers and blossoms in almost an unimaginable new variety with each generation. It's not for no reason. Forgive that near double negative. It's not for few reasons. It's not for a few reasons that someone like Schopenhauer would place the arts way above the sciences. I don't think he was an old curmudgeon that just Yahoo sucks science. I don't think that was motivating him. And I don't think he was simply the philosopher of pessimism. I mean, that's what scientists say because he doesn't like them. Um, I think he's talking about the arts and not simply as escape mechanisms. And somebody told me a year or two ago, Schopenhauer uses arts like screens to sort of hold back this totally infernal reality, to which I could only reply, have you read him? I mean, that's not quite what he's saying at all. Certainly he wants to hold, how about this for the irony of ironies? He thinks artists pursue the sublime, but he's worried about anybody discovering it. Because then you're looking at one of the Olympians, you're looking at something godlike, and it will probably blow you away, which is why society has to be protected from the sublime. There's an irony. But the individual artist needs to be cautious, but not necessarily fenced off. A remarkable man saying actually some remarkable things about where we're all going as a group. No, I mean, science, as I say, is remarkable, but not what moderns want it to be or think it is, And they seem to feel that they've sewn everything up. I mean, I had a spat with some so-called pantheists on Facebook. Was it last year, a couple of months ago? I can't remember last year. Where what they were actually talking about was scientism in the sciences, as opposed to pantheism. So okay, you can only say those things on the provisor that you can demonstrate that conditions across the entire universe are uniform. Ding, time's up, because we all know you can't do that. That is not possible. It's not possible for a human being to do, even if you could travel across the universe. We have to admit what we are and then expand in the most appropriate fashion. The arts. Plato, I mean, we said something earlier about people being worried by truth, and I remember the myth of Plato's cave rather too well in some ways. I mean, the people in chains at the bottom watching the shadow show, he says very clearly, they will kill you if you challenge their illusions. That's a bit worrying. I mean, it does seem to be borne out as well. So, great art leads to truth. This show leads to truth. The sciences point at the truth. Philosophers sometimes seek it, though, of course, that's not necessarily what they're all trying to do. Some are trying to explore language. Some are trying to explore a moral. So it's not what they all do. But those that are doing it, you can't help feeling would learn a thing or two from some of the great poets. I don't know if I think Novalis, a monumental, a titan of a man, is the kickoff for the whole romantic movement. I mean, but is that because I'm British and I like Coleridge? I'll have to think about that. Yeah, I mean, we've got to. What we're afraid of at the end of the day is the fact that it's not about being creative. You know, everybody and their grandparents are creative nowadays. Oh, little Johnny, you know, be slightly late at school, but be creative. You know, and of course, creative isn't creative. What they mean is making a mess and annoying people as opposed to doing anything new. Because again, you're back in that dangerous territory of the people that will kill you if you actually come up with anything new. Let's hear it for creativity and all of those things that go with it, which include esotericism. I seem to remember again somebody telling me years ago that the step before becoming a bodhisattva is actually the creative artist. I do hope that's true, and I'll hand it back to you, John.
Caught me off guard there. That's okay. Yeah, well, it came out of Germany, the Romantic movement. Its predecessor, the Sturm und Drang movement, the Storm and Stress movement, and it was an attempt to the pursuit of the beautiful. Really, and you got Schlegel. You know, he's a real key at the very beginnings, and there's other key individuals that participate in this flowering. But there was an influence on considerable number of individuals in England, and so you could get into a controversy about that, and that's healthy. That's fine. I suppose I should tell you why I disappeared for a moment. I had to go in the other room. I'd forgotten. But I had to go get the works of my associate here. The Grammar of Witchcraft is his first book of Reverend David Parry, and it's a Shakespearean study. It's not a grimoire. And his second work is his Shakespearean-esque poetry, Caliban's Redemption. And his major work is Mount Athos Inside Me, essays on religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented Daniela Irendust. And these are wonderful works, highly regarded in academia, and they are available on Amazon, and you can get them there whether you're in the US of A or in Europe or in the United States. And for myself, although I went and grabbed my faded copy, but my first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angels, some 640 pages. And it has text and diagrams and a foreword by Douglas Gabriel, who is with his wife Tyla. They're in charge of American Intelligence Media, for which I've been associated for a long time. But the Arcana of the Grail Angels, a study, spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And like I said, it's loaded with diagrams, and all those diagrams are reproduced also in my second volume, but I added a great many more. But these diagrams give you the outline of many of the things that I make reference to in these conversations with Reverend David and elsewhere. But this is my second volume in the Arcana of Light on the Path. It's more of a meditative tool, a study of the self-initiation manual written down by Mabel Collins that Rudolf Steiner used as the guide for meditative purposes in the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society when he was in charge of that in Germany before he separated off and founded the Anthroposophical Society. My books are available on eBay here in the continental US. If you're outside the US, you can contact me directly through my academia link below, and I can work out something through PayPal, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook. And you can also check out my Twitter page at John Barnwell 888, like listed right here below. And if you want to buy us cups of coffee, well, there's paypal.me/DPARRY777 for Reverend David. And for me, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And so there's our little plug. And I want to acknowledge the sponsorship of my efforts here by Vadim and Tyla and numerous other individuals that have contributed buying me cups of coffee and purchasing my works and all of that helps keeping this operation going. And so anybody that wants to contribute in whatever way, even $1 is much appreciated, because it does cost me something to keep this going. But in any regards, so in trying to find the spirit of what we're doing here, and people might be wondering again why I put the image of the Grail to either side of our pictures. And that's that whole concept, as I said earlier, it's like the cauldron of Ceridwen. It has to do with that, the meal on the first essence. It's, again, the Last Supper. And I frequently call on people, do yourself a favor and say grace when you eat a meal. And, you know, it's that mood of soul. People that meditate, I was speaking to somebody recently, and they were commenting about getting results in meditating, even though they've been doing it for a long time. I said, well, it's the mood of soul that you bring to the meditation that is that which can give you the kind of results you're seeking. It's not just trying to become empty. You want to have your emptiness be a fullness, because the emptiness, like that, the shunyata that they talk about in Buddhism, it's emptiness, but the emptiness is a fullness. And so it's kind of the opposite of what one might think, because it's coming into a relation with, it's not escaping relation to. And it's kind of a conundrum of sorts, because as we move into the sixth period, which is what we're up to do here, it becomes a question of being able to rise to that event. And Rudolf Steiner and I continue from the lecture, The Ego, that I made reference to earlier at the very beginning. And he says, thus can we say, out of our own epoch of culture, of the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, there is already now being prepared, and indeed in a very significant way, that which will constitute the real characteristic of the sixth epoch of civilization. And in general, human beings of our present age will separate themselves into two parts. First, those who today form no idea of all this, who know nothing of the preparation of the sixth epoch, who live for the day, as it were, blindly. And secondly, those who form ideas for themselves that something new is preparing, and who also know that what is being prepared is fundamentally something which must be accomplished through human beings, must be prepared by mankind. We can, in a certain connection, place ourselves in the time as a human being and say we are doing what is generally the custom, what others do, what our parents have educated us for. Or we could so place ourselves that we know consciously the following. If you will consciously be a link in the chain of humanity, then you must do something, either in yourself or in your environment, which contributes to what must come. to prepare the sixth period of culture as much as in you lies. Thus, the possibility of making preparation for the sixth period of culture can only be understood by entering a little into the character of our own epoch. For this, the comparative method offers itself as the best. And then he gets into comparing us to the previous civilizations. But the real crux of the matter is that if you just do something, even if it's just a little something every day, to remember that there's a certain sense of mission, a mission of faith, so to speak, a mission to allow yourself to be an instrument of the higher world without losing your individual nature. And that's the crux of the matter.
Gosh, it's very hard to follow that. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to go on about science a bit more, just in case people, because they're all sciences. I mean, it was Stuart Hampshire, I think, that said the word science should be applied to any organized body of knowledge that was testable or verifiable or both. I thought that was a very precise description, because some things can be testable but not verifiable, which of course legitimates the so-called esoteric and occult sciences. Also, I don't think we can abandon so much of Western history. It's not an accident that so many of those people genuinely gifted with genius, not a word I tend to throw around. I mean, everyone's a genius about everything nowadays. I know that, but those people that might actually be able to say something at the same time. It's not an accident that so many of them, the vast majority, gravitate towards these subject areas. That in itself can't simply be dismissed as the modern academy likes to do, or let me say the present academy in its usual form. I mean, the last time, this will get me blackballed, the last time I went to the School of Oriental and African Sciences, which is a place I love going to. I mean, obviously I've been able to go for some time due to lockdowns and everything. I mean, the whole attitude there was they didn't even know what they didn't know. So, this is not progressive. This is not progressive. What is it you actually are looking for? How about that? Let's take that as a point of departure. And then the entire room goes quiet because nobody's ever said that. I mean, for God's sake. The sciences, by which I include, if I'm using Stuart Hampshire's masterly definition, must make way for so much of human discourse. I mean, I think it was, I read about a year ago that actually there are more alchemy books bearing the Bible than nearly any other, if not every other form, any other book. That isn't an idle pursuit. That's not people talking out of their proverbial and wasting time. Various Armenians would have said the whole of the modern sciences, what was it, born from a group of libertines that will descend back to the dung heap, or maybe for an Armenian. No, I like the fact there's electrical lighting. I like the fact there are trees with fairy lights on them, as I'm looking at John's image. I like the fact we can take medicines. I like the fact there are tubes in London, if they're ever working properly. I like the fact we can fly to other countries and visit our friends and our loved ones. What is wrong with all of that? And why can't life be made? I mean, it's hard enough. Why can't it be made a little less hard by all these wonderful things? But to suddenly transform know-how of that sort into some sort of belief system is bewildering. I mean, I suppose what I'm aiming at there is sort of the unwritten, the unacknowledged religious text of most of the academies nowadays, which is B.F. Skinner and behaviorism, which I noticed Chomsky demolished. It was with B.F. Skinner. I think the attitude, I mean, he says, right, I'll start at the beginning. B.F. Skinner bouncing around as a young young guy thinking he solved the riddle of the universe, and presents behaviorism to the academy, and they like it because it's easy meat and it makes teaching students a lot less challenging. That seems to be the reality. Just tell them they're all what was it, empty jugs, and you're filling them with knowledge. That'll work. The trouble is, it does. The trouble is, it does work, but it doesn't mean it's an accurate description. If we're going back to the earlier semantic description I had of what is truth, it doesn't mean it's accurate, and it doesn't mean it's actually doing justice to the phenomena. What Chomsky took umbrage to it. I'm not a Chomsky hater. In fact, I used to know him offhand, briefly, in a shallow sort of way. And I used to get emails years back. I mean, by God, isn't he looking old recently? Anyway, sort of because I was trying to take him to Azerbaijan, and thereby hangs a tale. That's an adventure story I need to go into on this show at one point. He took umbrage because at that stage in his career, he didn't like the pretense of the modern sciences, the modern techniques and technologies. I mean, he ends up demolishing the whole thing by talking about no sound theory on a classic level. I mean, that's nasty, but true. And then he ends up saying, the problem is all of this grew out of, I'm paraphrasing massively, all of this grew out of an American attitude of that particular period, whereby they're looking at Europe and, all the terrible things that happen there. And surely isn't there a better modernist new way of doing things where we can avoid all of that and make real progress? So Chomsky, I think, is quite scathing on B.F. Skinner, and quite rightly so. Not because there's absolutely nothing to his theories, but because no theory ever solves everything. That's called quackery. Or it's called ignorance. Nowadays, there isn't much of a difference, point taken. But it's either one or the other, or both, and possibly both. The sciences must include what people used to call natural philosophy, or the imaginal sciences, at which point we suddenly open up the human being to vast vistas of experience, which are simply closed off to the majority at the minute, since the church isn't doing its job. I mean, I was making fun a minute ago. I'm a Protestant at heart. I've been saying that for years. I mean, the reality is, yes, I'm very proud and I love being of Catholic roots for one main reason: the sacramentalism. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, the light, the image, the perfumed air, all of it's very, very important to raise people up to something higher and better. And I do understand and I do appreciate that. I suppose the Protestant churches, and in many ways I resonate with it very deeply. That's the Zen of the West, sort of harsh, directional, not really open to argument, because doctrine isn't simply doctrine. It's a method. It's a way of pushing you, propelling you forward in something, as opposed to the sort of the Mahayana, which is messy and full of gods and lights and sages and all this sort of wonderful other stuff and magic and miracles. But I can't help, and that's Catholicism. I can't help thinking both are necessary. One size has never fitted all and shouldn't do. Therefore, the sooner we open up again is church becoming the new academy? Are we going back to the old days when most of the schools and the schoolmen were simply there for the social elite to make sure they could master their finances? And it was the monasteries and the churches that became the centres of education. Are we going back to that if all of these Franciscans have collections of Steiner? Let's hope so. Handing back to you, John.
Well, yeah, Chomsky. Yeah, he's really old. And given some of the things he's been spouting off lately, I think he's slipping into cognitive disabilities that's leading him to certain conclusions. And I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to get my channel trashed by authoritarian arms. But anyway, and you're going to be seeing people leaving. I I agree with Leo, our friend Leo Zagami. The current Pope Francis is not long of this world, and the next Pope will be from Africa. And I agree. I think that that's where it's heading. And but that being said, well, let's just say that unfortunately so much of their role in the world the Catholic Church has slipped into becoming a kind of a quasi-military real estate company. And we'll leave it at that, because I have a lot of respect for that which is genuine, and that which is genuine within the church, within any church, can rise above all this factionalism. And that's, I guess, the mood of soul that we want to bring, is that of reverence and awe, and that which is fearful in you, through proper application, can be transformed into awe before God and reverence. And in carrying that mood forward, that is the key. And so in doing that, we could perhaps get Reverend David in his festive Christmas sweater but hiding its clerical collar underneath. Could lead us in his weekly prayer.
No, not hiding. It's just that everything I do makes this jumper go upwards. I don't know why that is. And don't forget, I'm very proudly either what you call in Europe, I don't know how the designations work in America, independent Catholic, which of course withdrew from Rome for, oh God, let's never have a show on that, for a number of reasons, all of which are legalistic. And I'm not given to most. I can understand why, and yes, I'm sort of more on that side than the other side, and yada yada yada. But I do think we need to build bridges again. Or some people interpret my position as liberal Catholic. That doesn't mean, of course, a liberal within Rome. It means, quite rightly, someone that takes an interest in the esoteric. My own humble small church in that stream certainly is constantly trying to get me to say things on Blavatsky and Steiner. But it's not always appropriate. I'm sorry. And in the middle of a service of worship, you're not going to suddenly whip out books and beat people over the head with them. That's why this show is so important and so much fun, because that's the only outlet this particular liberal Catholic has for the esoteric stream of what he's doing. And as I said earlier, some of the concepts are deep and mystical and mind-blowing. My friends, like I said, let's bow our hearts for a few moments of prayer. I managed to find something finally this week, which I will read, because I've read too many versions of this to remember all the lines, and I'm still shot away from my earlier gig. St. Patrick's Prayer. May the strength of God pilot us. May the power of God preserve us. May the wisdom of God instruct us. May the hand of God protect us. May the way of God direct us. May the shield of God defend us. May the host of God guard us against the snares of the evil ones, against temptations of the world. May Christ now and always be with us. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you everyone for coming and sharing this Sunday afternoon with us, and our episode 67. Can you believe it? So, and to all, a Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year, and blessings on everybody.